ReZero, Side Story, Golden Siblings, Part 2, Chapter 1.
The appearance of the shimmering light bugs shattered the peace and quiet of the industrial city of Kostyul, starting with an explosion in the factory district, followed by the collapse of City Hall, and then finally an outbreak of light in the factory district again. All of these were the work of a mysterious creature called the light bug. Garfield, tisk. You're looking down on me. The light bugs, clustered together, became spires of geometric hues of light, and Garfield clicked his fangs and howled as many of the city's residents were shaken by their presence. He had just rescued about 10 people from a collapsed building. However, the determination throughout his body had not waned. He remained determined. With a beastly expression, he was about to run toward the swarm of light bugs, his fangs bared. Frederica, please wait, Garf. However, it was Frederica who stopped Garfield from rushing in with a raised voice. She looked to her younger brother, whose nose was scrunched up, and pleaded with him as she tended to an injured City Hall employee who was caught up in the collapsed building. Frederica, the priority is providing aid to people. Garf, your healing magic should be up to the task. Garfield, whatcha you sayin'? There's that damn huge thing going crazy right in front of us. If we just beat it up, Frederica, for the moment, there is more harm being done. Do you not sense it, Garf? Frederica gave a scathing look and sniffed at Garfield, who pointed at his enemy and insisted. At his sister's rebuke, Garfield snorted and clicked his tongue likewise. Garfield and Frederica, siblings with mixed beastman blood, had 5 keen senses. Among them, their sense of smell was unparalleled to that of humans, and even in this situation, they were able to distinguish various odors. The sudden appearance of the light bugs and the ensuing chaos, with no small amount of it, the smell of blood. Frederica, it is proof that the number of wounded is increasing, even if we could eliminate the light bugs. Garfield, there's no point, is what you mean? Shit, so what should I do then? Frederica. Very well done, Garf. Frederica smiled at Garfield, who was receptive to her opinion on the matter, and was ready to give priority to providing aid. Then, she once again turned her emerald eyes to the light bugs in the distance. The huge light bug, Frederica, a colossal light bug, like a tower of light, appeared in the center of the factory district. However, at least at the moment, there was no indication that the large light bug had begun to destroy anything. Although the combat power of the smaller light bugs encountered earlier at the factory were not significant, one cannot be optimistic about the behavior of an enemy of this size. Based on what was overheard in the conversation at City Hall, it was certain that there was a master who was controlling the light bugs. Their aim was unknown, but it would be convenient if they had no intention of mobilizing the light bugs right now. With this in mind, Frederica called out Lino Summer to the tall city mayor who stood by her side. Frederica, please send an evacuation order for the factory district and send relief to those who are injured. Fortunately, there is no sign of movement from the light bugs. Collect the injured without provoking them and gather them in one place for treatment. Garf. My brother should be able to help you there. Lino, agreed. Our first priority is to avoid casualties. Frederica's prompt and efficient instructions were followed without hesitation by Lino Rex, who was always ready to listen to the opinions of others, instead of sitting on the laurels of his position as the city's mayor. These were the qualities of a politician. As one would expect from a man who was in charge of one of the 5 great cities, he was an outstanding person. As Frederica was impressed, Lino looked up and said, but, staring at the light bugs from a distance, Lino, your younger brother is correct, we cannot leave that thing alone. We need to send a strike team immediately too. Frederica, I would not worry about that. Lino, wah. The next moment, Lino's expression, which had seemed to have never been upset, slightly tightened. Frederica saw this out of the corner of her eye and felt a slight euphoria, though it was not quite enough to compensate for the grief she was causing Petra. Lino's cheeks hardened, and standing on the grass in front of his gaze was a 4-legged beast with a beautiful golden coat of fur. Her appearance was similar to that of a leopard, with emerald eyes, sharp fangs, and a commanding face that somehow hinted at intelligence and grace. With its elegant physique, it was a golden female leopard that even brought an out-of-place feeling of excitement. In terms of sudden appearances, It was as abrupt as the light bugs. But unlike the light bugs, the source of the leopard was clear. If one looked at the scattered clothes under her feet, Lino, Frederica Summers' beastification, Frederica, this is an emergency situation, so please do not be offended by the vulgarity of my behavior. I will return to the mansion and inform the master. Lino, it would be reassuring if Margrave Mathers could come. Once the initial shock had passed, Lino acclimatized very quickly. He immediately affirmed Frederica's decision and turned to the surrounding personnel. Lino, I know you are all in a state of confusion and turmoil. However, every second counts. Every second here is worth a human life, so please follow my instructions, everyone. At Lino's calm command, the personnel looked up. Then, a moment after, they nodded from wherever they were, stood up, and began to move to deal with the disturbance. They were highly trained. No, it was a difference in consciousness, or so it felt when they were only Lino's subordinates. Frederica, Garf, please comply with Lino Summer in case of an emergency. Garfield, make your own decisions, right? I ain't a little kid, I know what I'm doing. Frederica, no matter how much time has passed, you will always be a kid to me. At the words of his older sister, in her leopard form, Garfield clicked his tongue in a sulky manner. Frederica's 4 paws kicked the ground as she gazed on with a ferocious grin. A moment later, her figure shifted into a golden wind. The beastified Frederica ran so fast that it seemed as if it were an illusion. Garfield, with sis like that, it won't take long for that bastard Roswell to get the message. Our amazing selves are. Lino, let us move forward with the same dedication as that of Frederica Summer. Evacuate the people from the factory district, treat the wounded, and prevent the damage from spreading. Can we count on your healing magic, Garfield? Getton's network, who do you think you're talking to? Garfield responded to Lino's confirmation with gnashed teeth and looked behind him. What was the purpose of the huge light bug, unmoving at the end of his gaze? Garfield, I don't like the idea of being left behind, sis.
Chapter 2.
Kicking the ground with her 4 beastly legs, bathed in a fierce wind, Frederica felt euphoric. Even though she knew that it was not the time for this, she could not stop herself from being excited. Perhaps it was the delight of the beastman blood that flowed within her. She had never spoken with another beastman or half-beastman before, wondering if they had ever questioned their own existence. In her own heart, there was endless self-questioning. So, which of these 2 forms was truly who she was? Frederica, she could not say. Beastification itself was a special kind of transformation that only those who were half-beastman possessed. It invoked the blood that flowed within oneself, and one abandoned one's human body and underwent a complete metamorphosis into the body of a beast. Just as Frederica became a leopard, Garfield had the power to transform into a tiger. There were more than a few half-beasts in the world with similar powers. What did they think? Did they not wonder? If the real her was the one that stood on 2 legs, then what was the true nature of this feeling of liberation and euphoria when she became a beast? Was it not because she was so constrained by her normal self that she felt liberated at the moment she became a beast? If so, was her true self a person or a beast? Frederica, if it were Garf, he would not even have these worries. Frederica's beastly mouth drew a wry smile at the thought of her younger brother. That was not to say that Garfield was reckless and simple-minded. He was surprisingly sensitive, timid, and a real handful. The fact that he sacrificed himself for more than a decade to preserve the sanctuary spoke for itself. So the reason Garfield did not have the same doubts as Frederica was that for him, the root of Frederica's problems was trivial. They were undeniably siblings by blood, yet Frederica and Garfield's personal circumstances are different. However, she had no intention of going out of her way to talk to her brother about this particular issue. Frederica, far too many distracting thoughts. Right now, my top priority is to inform the master as soon as possible. Shaking her head lightly, Frederica concentrated on the speed at which she ran. Frederica's speed, like a golden wind, reduced a 10-minute walk to less than a minute, which, considering the distance from Kostyul to the Roswell mansion, was more than enough for a round trip. Despite these jumbled thoughts, her speed was unhindered, and her judgment was not wrong, but only if things were limited to the chaos in Kostyul caused by the proliferation of the light bugs. Frederica. The moment her forelegs stepped onto the ground, Frederica's nose caught the scent of hostility. It was not instinctive, but more like a genuine, well-crafted intent to harm. With a single swoop, it came at Frederica's legs, which kicked the ground. A split-second decision had been made. She slammed her paws into the dirt, sending up a cloud of dust, and changed directions. Flying sideways while maintaining her speed, the female leopard evaded the threat that was closing in on her. However, that's nice, tomboy. I'm also fond of teaching some manners to people like ya, Frederica, HK. The speed with which the enemy was moving was effortlessly catching up to Frederica, who was now leaping to the side at high speed. Frederica stiffened at the sound of a man's voice whispering in her ear and swung her claws. Without mercy, she would gouge her opponent's face with a blow that would leave claw marks on even the thickest steel plate. The front leg was swung with tremendous force, but was stopped before it could strike her enemy directly. Then, a powerful kick to Frederica's exposed torso sent her into a silent fit of agony. Frederica, HK, spittle flew out of her mouth, as Frederica let out a pained cry at the tremendous force knocking her sideways. Although the durability of beastmen was extraordinarily high, even among demi-humans, it was not so much the case for Frederica. Even taking this into account, the power of that blow was still unbelievable. Normally, I'd just tear off a limb or two here, but my client insisted, you see? They ordered me to do no more damage than necessary. So, about that, Frederica, would you mind putting up a little more of a fight? If you resist, I can make the case that I hurt you to make you behave. Well, by the looks of it, that's not gonna happen. The man with a ferocious demeanor looked down upon Frederica, who was panting in agony, and laughed brazenly. He had dull golden hair tied into a knot at the back and wild-looking facial hair. No further information could be gleaned by Frederica in the spur of the moment. You should sleep for now. Chances are, you'll be happier if you don't wake up. Such were the man's last words before Frederica's consciousness faded.
Chapter 3.
The change in the huge lightbug's movement conveniently came when the treatment of the severely injured was over. Garfield, HK, what the? Wiping his bloody fingers with his waistband, Garfield looked up and wrinkled his nose. This was right after he followed Lino's directions and applied healing magic to every single one of the gathered wounded. The workload would have made a conventional mage dizzy, but Garfield still felt strong. This was thanks to Garfield's divine protection of earth spirits. As long as Garfield's feet were in contact with the earth, the power of his divine protection allowed him to draw upon the earth's vitality, or in other words, mana. Of course, that amount also had its limit, but it was far more than the ordinary person. It had reached a point in which it was possible for him to make frequent use of his mana. In Subaru's words, it's like a spare tank of gas. At any rate, Garfield, who was hardly affected by the use of healing magic due to this blessing, saw movement in the huge lightbug at the edge of his vision. Garfield, since its piercing emergence from the factory district's ground, where it had caused damage to the surrounding area with that powerful impact, the unmoving, glittering giant, its head glared at the surrounding area. That gesture, it was as if it was searching for prey. Garfield, yo, City Mayor San. Sis hasn't come back yet. But if this thing goes on a rampage, it'll be a crazy mess. Before that, Lino, you are going to subdue it. I respect your decision, Garfield. Lino, who had understood Garfield's intentions and was taking command of the battle, immediately nodded his head. It helped that he was quick on the uptake, but he was a man who never said no to a proposal, even one from Frederica. It made one wonder if he was not decisive, but just unthinking. Lino, without a doubt, you are currently the strongest force in the city. I wish to entrust it to you, Garfield, You get it, don't ya? My amazing self will take care of everything. Nodding, Lino's statement gave Garfield a push forward, throwing away his doubts. Then, extending his arms to those around him, he stepped forcefully on the ground and, Garfield, anyone who is far away, listen to the sound. If you're close, then gather your eyes here. My amazing self is going to beat all your enemies with my fists. Chanting a speech he had learned from Subaru, Garfield's body launched like an arrow. The city's residents were astonished by Garfield's instantaneous disappearance. Leaving their astonishment behind, Garfield vigorously shattered the cobblestones, flew across the rooftops, kicked the walls, and made a suicidal attack on the huge lightbug. Garfield, with the residents having already evacuated, Garfield sprinted through the now deserted city block. He leapt, flew, and advanced to the heart of the huge lightbug, as a flood of lightbugs rushed his way from the street corners. The huge lightbug was formed by the gathering of many lightbugs, but there were still plenty of lightbugs that were not swallowed up by it. It was a clever trap for a bug, Garfield, that ain't enough to stop my amazing self. A few puny lightbugs were not enough to slow down Garfield's advance. The fire and wind attacks that they unleashed were extinguished with a swing of his arm and a stomp of his foot, and the lightbugs, having lost their strength, were unable to maintain themselves and collapsed. It was a desperate attack. Their behavior was less than that of insects, unnatural, as their desperate behavior meant nothing. Garfield, what sort of shitty bastard is controlling them? Inwardly irritated by what was happening, Garfield clicked his fangs. There was no doubt that the lightbugs had intent behind them, as evidenced by the fact that they targeted City Hall. And it was clear that this was the result of human malice, not animal instinct. Therefore, there was a mastermind directing the actions of both the huge lightbug and the lightbugs. There was a mastermind, but their plan was too poorly executed. The lightbugs' futile deaths were a good sign of that. Garfield, with this thought, Garfield, who was growing angry at his invisible enemy, noticed an unexplainable presence and raised his eyebrows. His gaze turned not to the huge lightbug, but to the ground a short distance in front of it. Garfield, that presence, there was the fast-moving back of a person that ran straight down the street in a straight line to the huge lightbug. As Lino said, no one was more capable than Garfield in the city right now. The city's security forces were also prioritizing the evacuation of the residents and should not have the capability to take on the huge lightbug. So, even seeing their back, the impression at first was of a reckless, out-of-control resident running loose. But their steps were fast, and it was hard to believe that they were just a confused resident. Then, the identity of the person became immediately apparent. Garfield Summer. A figure running at tremendous speed looked back without slowing down. As they continued to run backward, a young man with dark blue hair and a monocle was looking toward him. It was Klein, a butler who served Arnrose, a relative of Roswell. Garfield, wah. The question that Garfield was trying to ask was to the effect of "What are you doing here?" No sooner than that, the huge lightbug launched an attack on Garfield and Klein. Multiple lights blended together, and the light that was emitted was dyed white as rays of heat burned through the streets. Buildings and trees along the way could be seen vanishing as they were burned by the intense heat. Although weak individually, thousands of lightbugs could accumulate extraordinary power when united into a single body. Even Garfield would not be able to survive their heat rays. The only reason he did not get hit was because of Klein's hand signals as he ran backward, not words, but hand gestures to warn him of the incoming danger. Thanks to that considerable service, Garfield dove under the huge lightbug's legs and slammed his fist into its massive body. The moment his fist hit, it felt like stone had cracked and shattered on impact, gouging out a chunk of it. However, there was nothing endearing about a huge lightbug made from several combined that could be subdued by a single fist strike. Instead, it was a colony that only appeared to be a huge body. Only one of the lightbugs could be killed with a single fist strike. In short, the enemy had several thousand lives left. One shot was far from enough, and even with 100, it would still appear lively. Garfield, if that's the case, I'm gonna put 10,000 punches into ya. Barking and declaring 10 times the number of blows required, Garfield's entire body resonated with energy in order to destroy. With the sensation of boiling blood, his muscles swelled, and his divine protection sucked up the power of the earth. Fists, claws, and fangs were swung, and the body of the huge lightbug was vigorously devoured. Garfield, while shimmering in complex and mysterious ways, flakes of light peeled off from the writhing, huge lightbug. All of them consisted of the lightbugs that made up the huge lightbug, releasing mana like an explosive burst. Chain explosions of light erupted under the feet of the huge light bug, and Garfield, unable to defend against the resulting range, was also thrown in it and blown away. He put his hands into the ground, forcibly breaking his movement, and looked up. Although he was not injured, there was bitterness at being forced to start over. Furthermore, Garfield, they just keep comin' and comin', there's no end to 'em. However many he removed or scraped, more light bugs were incorporated into the huge light bug to be replenished afterward. Garfield had no intention of getting pushed around whatsoever, but the damage to the city would be enormous at this rate. Klein, you seem to be having difficulties. Assistance, Garfield, yeah. Against the advancing light bugs, Garfield made a motion of his hands as if literally swatting an insect, and then glared at Klein, who had come up next to him. He was a calm-faced young man whom he had only met a few times in the month before. The reason was that it was Arnrose, his master, who provided housing for the residents who had been displaced from the sanctuary, as well as for the people in the Roswell mansion, which had burned to the ground. From that time on, he had always thought that he had a very unusual demeanor, but, Garfield, help me, what the fuck can you do? Klein, indeed. I am but a butler, so I am proud to say that I have a wide variety of small skills in that regard. Proficiency. Having said that, Klein stepped forward and gently lifted his hand behind Garfield's back. Then he clenched his 5 fingers. Immediately after, the torso of the huge light bug exploded. Klein, the huge light bug was split in half down the middle of its body and could no longer support itself. Klein looked at its upper body, which was falling down toward the city. Klein, that is not good. If I make a mess, Arnrose Summer will reprimand me. Delight, narrowing his eyes at the future reprimand, Klein continued to move the fingertips of his outstretched hand. With that simple movement, the upper body of the huge light bug, which was about to smash into the street, was completely disassembled. If the once formidable mass dispersed and broke into countless light bugs, the damage to the streets would be trivialized in one fell swoop. There was a sound of something granular and hard steadily dropping, and the scattered light bugs fell like stones. They quickly rose up and gathered again, trying to get back together to reform the huge light bug. Klein, if the structure is disturbed, then they cannot reform. A little creativity. Instantaneous, Garfield. I don't get what you're doing, but Klein's attack and ingenuity were neither seen nor understood whatsoever. But as long as Klein was on his side, he did not care. Garfield was able to come to that conclusion. He stomped down, cracked the streets, and the rising earth drilled the light bugs from directly below. This was the same technique that was used at the factory, much to Frederica's outrage, but it was the best solution for killing a large area of targets. Afterward, he would have to convince Lino that the damage was unavoidable. Garfield, so, why are you here again? Klein, I was on my way to the master's residence, accompanied by Arnrose Summer. Seeing that, Arnrose Summer ordered me to deal with the situation. Commanding, Garfield, oh, that little miss, is it? The huge light bug, which had been broken apart and reduced to half its original size, released a ray of heat that was also reduced to half power. The upraised shield of earth caught it, and the two exchanged a few words behind the mud wall. Klein's answer made Garfield recall an image of Arnrose, and it made sense. She was 9 years old, but she was so mature that it was hard to believe that. In fact, Garfield, who did not know much about the world, had a lot of level-headed youths around him. Certainly Arnrose, but also Petra. Sticking close to Frederica and so on, Petra often glared at Garfield with her round eyes, as if he were an enemy. This time, she was very hostile to the idea of him going out alone with his sister. Garfield. Oh, that's reminding me, Sis Shaw is taking her time. Klein, Frederica? I do not see her, but she accompanied you? Inquiry, Garfield. Oh, she went to the mansion to fetch that bastard Roswell. If it was his sister's beastly legs, then she should have arrived at the mansion around the time the huge light bug started to move. From there to here, there should have been some kind of follow-up to the attack and defense. It was then that Garfield had such a question. Hi, yeah. The shout coincided with a long spear of ice being thrust into the torso of the huge light bug. Garfield. With Garfield and Klein firmly rooted in place, The huge light bug was trying to reconstruct its shattered body in the meantime, and its intentions were successfully thwarted by a single, powerful shot. The huge light bug was thrown back by the impact and fell to the ground, scattering fragments. The air hissed as the large hole in its body froze over. It was a regeneration-killing blow that interfered with the regrowth of its huge body, and the one who unleashed that merciless icy blow was Garfield. And Klein-san. Are you two okay? A young girl with flowing silver hair, Emilia, rushed down the street with nimble footsteps. She was probably the one who delivered the coup de grace that was too powerful to be called just a reinforcement. Seeing that figure, Garfield closed one eye, and Klein politely bowed. Klein, Emilia Summer, I apologize for the inconvenience. Regretful, Emilia, huh? Don't worry about it. I should be sorry, I just came out of nowhere and didn't even talk to you two. From a distance, I just saw someone being attacked. Garfield, that's a very Emilia Summer-like answer. She rushed in and made her opening move with such power. It was the ultimate display of her character, but her nonchalant attitude was all the more frightening when you saw the results of her attack. Emilia, Roswell told me just to freeze the wounds of those little ones who were sticking together. Garfield, huh? So that's the bastard's meddlin', huh? No wonder I thought you were so merciless. So, I don't see sis, did you leave her behind? Emilia, Frederica? Emilia's eyes widened in surprise. Her reaction made Garfield feel uncomfortable, and he tilted his head in puzzlement with an, Garfield, sis went to the mansion to ask for help. That's why you showed up, right, Emilia Summer? Emilia, I came because I happened to see a big light in the distance. I talked to Roswell and rushed over. Subaru and the others will be here later. Garfield, sis didn't come back. Garfield's cheeks stiffened at Emilia's unexpected statement. Frederica, who had gone to tell them about the huge light bug, would not have taken any detours along the way. First of all, if she had not passed Emilia, who had come straight here from the mansion, then, Garfield, sis got stopped by some enemy. Klein, Emilia, huh? What? Klein silently narrowed his eyes at Garfield's intuition. Only Emilia couldn't keep up with the situation, so her being confused could not be helped. Garfield tried to choose the right words, wondering how to explain it. Klein, Emilia Summer, while this is impolite, can we leave this to you? Delegation. With that said, Klein skipped most of the explanation and told Emilia just the conclusion. Then, in front of the two astonished people, he indicated with his hand toward the huge light bug. Klein, we believe that the adversary who controls that thing has kidnapped Frederica, putting the custody of Frederica between him and me. I would like to ask Emilia Summer, who is a good match to dispatch that thing. Petition, Emilia. Is everything okay with the two of you? Klein, assuredly so. Promise. The exchange between Emilia and Klein was established, leaving Garfield behind. With a promise exchanged, Emilia faced the huge light bug with a serious look on her face, holding up both hands and outpouring powerful mana. Seeing that power, the huge light bug's attention was drawn to Emilia. Behind her, Klein looked back at Garfield, and, Klein, as you have heard. Leave this place to Emilia Summer, and we will go to Frederica. Search, Garfield, oi, are you sure about that? But Emilia Summer is an important person not only to the captain, but to that bastard Roswell as well. That's, Klein, putting something in a frame and displaying it is not the only way to treat it with care. Differentiation. Immediately after Klein's words, the huge light bug emitted a screeching cry, or rather, a ray of heat that made the atmosphere scream, but Emilia's shield of ice defended against it, and it was reflected back into the sky. Emilia's ranged attack power and adaptability were better suited for a fight that did not cause damage to the city. Klein, and thus, we have our roles to play. Right people in the right place. Garfield, role. To Garfield's question, Klein closed one eye and then answered, Klein, Frederica, to rescue her. Immediacy.
Chapter 4.
It's about time you woke up, lassie. At such a call. Slowly, Frederica's consciousness was roused. Frederica, the first thing she felt was two different kinds of cold against her body. One was a cold wind that caressed her skin directly, and the other was a hard, cold feeling that rested against the entire backside of her body. Furthermore, what she noticed after feeling the cold was, "Frederica, both of my arms, ? You are being restrained. Apologies, but I'd like you to refrain from using your beastification. If you don't, the blade on the inner part of the shackles is designed to slice through that beautiful skin. I would like to avoid that. At any rate, Frederica, ? Lassie's blood would be wasted, wouldn't it?" Both of Frederica's hands were shackled, and she was restrained by chains. Within her field of vision, a figure entered. It was a strange-looking man peering at her as she lay on a bed of iron. He had slicked back grey hair and a sickly white face. His bony cheeks and neck gave the impression of emaciation, but it was his eyes that were most striking. His gaze, devoid of temperature, was colder than the wind and the bed, and when the man said the word blood, Frederica's fangs trembled. "Frederica, so you are after my blood, right? ? Surely you are aware of this, lassie of rare blood. Your blood is a treasured resource." Frederica was more than convinced by this simple statement. The enemy's goal was clear. The term rare blood mentioned by the man meant, as one might expect, blood that was extremely rare. The blood was different from that of normal people. Frederica did not know the specific differences, but the taste, smell, and various other things contained within the blood were different from those of normal people. In many cases, the difference seemed to be ritually useful, and Roswell once told her that more than a handful were seeking Frederica's rare blood. This rare blood led Roswell to agree to take Frederica out of the sanctuary in the first place. ? To be honest, I was surprised. I never thought that someone with such rare blood as you, lassie, would come to the city so openly. Not once, not twice, but many times. Somewhere, Frederica heard the man's voice, trembling with glee as she observed her surroundings. The chill in the air and the wind indicated that this was most likely a cave where the sun did not reach, or underground. It was annoying to the unbeastified and completely naked Frederica that she was not allowed to wear even a piece of cloth. The other truly uncaring party probably thought Frederica was a blood bag or something. Truly, the fact that his interest was only in her blood stirred the recesses of Frederica's mind. "Frederica, what are you going to do with my blood? ? Oh, interested. That's good. Lassie has a right to hear. That's because Lassie's name should belong to the great achievement that will begin here." The man nodded his head brilliantly like a doll and took a step to the side, looking amused. Frederica was taken aback upon seeing something that had been hidden behind the man's back, for there were cabinets and innumerable glass vessels, also filled with blood, lined up in rows. "Frederica, these are ? These are the blood samples of my soul. I am a researcher. I am searching for a way to save people that does not rely on magic. Particularly with blood. Like mana, there are many mysteries surrounding blood in the human body that haven't been uncovered. Frederica, the mysteries of blood ? To unravel them is akin to unraveling the secrets of life. That's why I turn to your blood, lassie. Rare blood will advance my research into the future." Frederica was flabbergasted to see the man's eyes glowing with ecstasy. There was no hint of a lie or hesitation. The man was serious about saving people. His words of salvation were his genuine intentions, not the construction of a desire for knowledge or curiosity. ? Consider that a drop of your blood, lassie, saves one life. Isn't that a great honor? Rare blood is a chosen honor. Frederica, an honor. You caused chaos in the city to capture me? ? Using the rare forms of life that occur in Costule. The shallow ones disparage it as a light bug, but it is nothing of the sort. Despite appearances, it is a being that was naturally born. The man responded to Frederica's question without hiding his frankness. But the answers to those questions only left one's mouth open in surprise. Within a month, the man spotted Frederica's rare blood, and in a much shorter period of time, he developed a plan to get his hands on Frederica. So he managed to create a diversion and capture her simultaneously. Truly, he was a maddeningly obsessive opponent that was hard to deal with. ? Yo, Doc. Can I talk to ya for a second? Then, a thick, wild voice, The opposite of the high-pitched man's voice overtook him. The voice sounded familiar. The figure of the other man also quickly came into her view. It was the muscular blonde man, the one who had beaten and restrained Frederica. The man looked at Frederica on the bed and whistled. Whoa wee, that's a nice view. This is so good, I could stay here forever. What's going on, Hayden-kun? I am speaking right now of my noble mission to the rare-blooded woman. Hayden, those things can wait. It seems like we've got a visitor coming our way. What do you wanna do, Doc? The researcher, who was called Doc by the man who radiated a ferocious presence, had a clouded face. As it was, the researcher bit his nails and muttered in a nervous voice, "You, researcher, once again, what meaning is there in stopping my noble mission? You ruffian who doesn't understand the gravity of the situation." The researcher became enraged and grabbed one of the blood samples from the cabinet. He thrust it at the man in front of him. "Researcher, Hayden-kun. Hunt down the intruders. Fulfill your duty." Hayden, good grief, I hate it when people treat violence as my duty. Well, you ain't wrong. Having said that, the man took the blood sample with 2 fingers and went to follow the researcher's instructions. Just before he did so, he turned back to Frederica, gave her a wink, and, "Hayden, I hope you look forward to my return. The doc wants you and I to partner up, my dearie, in order to increase the supply of rare blood." Frederica, "I certainly will not." Hayden, a strong-willed woman, "I like ya." Waving a hand that held a blood sample from over his back, the man disappeared from sight. Seeing this, Frederica tensed her arms. The chains clinked, and pain shot through her wrists. "Researcher, I said it's useless. You can't remove them, lassie." "Oh, what a waste." The blade inserted inside the handcuffs sliced a shallow cut across the skin of Frederica's wrist. Then the researcher looked at the dripping blood and shook his head, sadness in his eyes. Then the researcher cleared his throat, and, "Researcher, I was going to wait until Hayden-kun was back, but then again, I can't. I want to enjoy the taste of rare blood and its mysteries." "Well, at least one part of it." "Frederica, you." The wide-eyed researcher knelt beside her and gently brought his face close to the wound on Frederica's wrist. Feeling the man's rough breathing, Frederica gnashed her teeth and endured her shame. If Hayden was sent to intercept, then someone had come to Frederica's aid. Whether it was Garfield or Roswell, she didn't know. Frederica was terrified of the sensation of having her wrist licked, but she simply held her breath and closed her mind to the humiliation that she endured at this moment.
Chapter 5.
Garfield, usually, when you kidnap someone, you cover your tracks, don't you? But this one left such an obvious stench behind. What are they doing? Klein, common sense would suggest that either the criminals were careless or it is a trap aimed at us. Given that Frederica was taken, the latter is more likely. Conjecture. Not long after leaving Costule, Garfield and Klein were standing in front of a cave. It was a cave dug out from under a cliff, with the entrance to the hideout being magically disguised. The clifftop offered a great view of the industrial city in the distance, making it a perfect location for nefarious schemes. However, other than the disguised entrance, it was a lousy trick. "Garfield, I can smell Sis from the inside." "She smells like blood, too." Klein, "Yes, but why?" Questioning, Garfield, "It doesn't smell like Sis's blood. But there's a shitload of it." Wrinkling his nose, Garfield was sickened by the smell of blood wafting from inside the cave. There were individual differences in the smell of blood, and the smell of Frederica's blood was particularly distinctive. When compared to his memory, the smell of blood in the air was not from Frederica. The smell of blood was too strong. Garfield, 10 or 20 people ain't enough for this amount. Klein, the smell of blood other than Frederica's rare blood. Is it the kind of vampire that seeks rare blood? Rumination, Garfield, rare blood? Garfield cocked his head at the unfamiliar term. Klein responded with a short affirmative while repositioning his monocle. Klein, Frederica is the owner of a unique type of blood known as rare blood. This blood has ritualistic influence and a strong sensitivity to mana. Even dragons are captivated by it. Divine qualities. Garfield, huh? I ain't ever heard of it. If sis is like that, then my amazing self is. Klein, no, rare blood is, it's unrelated to genetic siblings or parent-child relationships. Rare blood is more like a single-generation mutation. Frederica's blood is special, for better or worse. Absolute, Garfield, and some bastard is trying to get it. Fuck that. Sharply gnashing his fangs and laying his anger bare, Garfield stepped into the cave. Just the same, Klein also followed behind his back. Their footsteps echoed in the dark passageway. Naturally, if the entrance was disguised, there would be no traps in the cave. Since the hiding place was their hideout, there was no way that anyone would be foolish enough to lay traps. To start with, ? If we gave you that kinda welcome, it wouldn't have been worth the trouble of inviting ya, would it, Garfield? A voice greeted them as they entered a passageway and arrived at a slightly open space. In front of them, a tall man with tied-up golden hair and a ferocious smile waited them. Garfield's muscles rejoiced at the ferocious dread that overflowed from this man's entire body. He was undeniably a formidable opponent. Klein, this is most unusual. A half-breed of the Lion Man tribe. Scarce, Garfield, really? To see through him at a glance, it seems you're not just some smug bastard. Having his lineage discovered at a glance, the man who had been paying attention to Garfield then took interest in Klein. The man crossed his strong arms and smirked as if to flaunt his white fangs. ? Correctly guessed, I am the Lion Man, Hayden Garrow. This will probably be very short-lived, but I'm looking forward to getting to know you, both of you. Especially that blonde boy, Garfield. You picked my amazing self, you gotta be full of yourself, ain't ya? Well, who was the one who had made a show of leaving Sis's smell behind? Hayden, it's a love letter to ya. I'm thrilled you followed it for me, boy. You see, I love to beat the shit out of younger guys. I'm really fond of breaking guys like ya, my friend. Garfield, you're gonna break my amazing self? What the fuck are ya talking about? Klein, truly, you do not understand. Disappointment, Garfield. Oh, Hayden, yeah? The man who identified himself as Hayden as well as Garfield turned to Klein at the same time. At the end of their gaze, Klein simply shook his head, as if depressed. Then, he gently placed his hand on Garfield's shoulder beside him. Klein, admittedly, Garfield Summer's heart is immature and green, and, therefore, precious. However, if you are yearning for the brightness of its potential, the pleasure you take in casting shadows upon it is shallow and thoughtless. It is too careless a judgment and desire, I must say. Disappointment, Hayden, I see. You've come all the way here in your fancy clothes. I thought you must be a weirdo, but I guess that don't make you any less a scholar. Klein, comparisons are meaningless. I am what I am, and he is what he is. There is just a difference in principle. Separation, Garfield, I really don't get it, but... Garfield scratched his head and narrowed his eyes at the exchange between Hayden and Klein. As he did, he looked over at Klein, who was standing beside him. Garfield, so what are you trying to say about my amazing self? Klein, you have an unbreakable brilliance. Our adversary who speaks of breaking it, for example, is laughable. Absurd, Garfield, ha. That's pretty easy to understand, ain't it? Hearing Klein's answer, Garfield's previously hazy face cleared. Garfield glared at Hayden in front of him, slamming his fists together in front of his chest. In short, Garfield found himself in a fight. And on top of that, his older sister was also kidnapped. Garfield, then I guess I don't need to go easy on ya, go, Klein. Klein, you do not mind? Affirmation, Garfield, the bastard wanted me, right? It's also sickening for Sis's blood to be drained out of her. I'm counting on ya, Klein, I understand. Certainly. Hearing Garfield's request, Klein took a step back. Hayden, who had been watching the exchange, held out his hand and said, Hold up, Hayden, stop talking away as you please. If you pass me by, that researcher will be furious. Then I won't get any of my owed blood, either. Garfield, blood, Hayden. That's right. That researcher's completely nuts, but he's getting results. People who are really crazy come up with ideas that others normally wouldn't. As he said this, Hayden raised the glass container he had been hiding behind his back, a vessel filled with blood, above his head and poured its contents into his own mouth. There was a sense of disgust at the act itself, but that too was fleeting. Overshadowing the disgust, a powerful sense of caution rushed through his entire body, and Garfield assumed a battle stance. Immediately after, Hayden's kick, closing the distance in the blink of an eye, hit Garfield, who had been holding his ground, right in the middle of his crossed arms, sending him flying backward. Hayden, ha ha. Your lovely big sister took one of those shots to the belly and collapsed. Garfield, HK, what the fuck are you doing to Sis's belly? You perverted bastard, Garfield howled, swinging his kicked arm. For an instant, he turned his gaze to where Klein was. This should be an opportunity to go and rescue Garfield's sister. But his figure was already gone. Seeing this, Garfield put strength into both his legs. And then, Garfield, rah, to get back at him, Garfield launched a spinning back kick, aiming for the advancing Hayden's chest. The rock-crushing blow caught Hayden in the torso, and the big man backed off with a cry of pain. Hayden, oh. That's good, that's good, that's good. But now it's my turn. Garfield, what crap are you talking about? Hayden, HK, his knee thrust into the face of the once delighted Hayden, leaving his body shaking from the blow. Bending over, he grabbed him by the back of the neck, blood dripping from his nose, then slammed him down hard onto the ground head first. Garfield laughed, snorting at the rising discontent and the smell of Hayden's own bleeding. He furiously crushed his resented enemy for doing something so outrageous to his older sister. Garfield, you know, my amazing self came out of the sanctuary to smash misguided bastards like ya. Right above his head, Hayden's face took a direct hit from the sole of Garfield's shoe. The impact, which shook the entire cave violently, mercilessly shattered his bitter enemy's nose.
Chapter 6.
The wind blew. That was the moment he was eluded. Klein, you should put on this coat. Your appearance is unsightly. Indignation. Upon speaking, he placed the coat on her naked upper body. That assured concern was infuriating. The humiliation of a moment ago was overlaid by another humiliation, wondering why, of all people, he had come to this place. HK. How did you get in? Hayden Kun is. Klein, if that was him, he is in the middle of entertaining my companion. I do not expect him to survive for very long, but it would be insensitive for her to remain in this place for any longer. Separation? Likewise, Klein, blood sample collector, Leonardo Baroness, your savagery ends here. Demise? Frederica, her movement restrained on top of the bed, was unable to see the entire exchange. However, she could see the back of the young man putting his jacket on. Leonardo, the researcher, faced him. Leonardo's cheeks stiffened as he shook his head at the young man's pronouncement. Then, as if he could not accept his own demise, he reached for the blood samples behind him. Leonardo, there is no way I will stop. You will not keep me from my progress. My breakthrough. His voice trailing off, Leonardo swept away the blood samples with his arm and dropped them to the ground in one fluid motion. The sound of shattering glass echoed throughout the darkened room, and the smell of blood permeated the air. Leonardo, thus bathed in a large amount of blood, began to let out a low growl. His body, which had been only skin and bones, bulged out, and the color of his pale skin turned bright red. While maintaining his human appearance with merely a single layer of skin, Leonardo was transformed by the power of the abnormal blood. Upon smelling the fragrant blood samples, Frederica was overcome with nausea. It was impossible to imagine how many people were sacrificed and what was produced by this mixture of blood. Leonardo, with this all-powerful blood, all wrongs will be eradicated. Lassie here will be the foundation for this. Klein, unfortunately, I cannot spare the time to listen to your unbearable delusions. Apology. Moreover, she is the master's property. It is my contract to protect her. Adherence. The young man dared not step back in the face of the bloated Leonardo's caustic words. Hearing this quiet declaration of war, Leonardo's bright red eyeballs trembled, and he thrust out his arms. It was a simple movement, but his arm was being swung with an extraordinary amount of muscle mass, making it an impressive weapon of destruction. A single blow would shatter even the thickest stone wall, and it approached the young man's slender body without mercy. However, Klein, the attitude of aiming high is commendable. It is an idea I would not have had. Impressive, Leonardo, is that so? Klein, however, there are too many problems with that methodology. Reckless, the sole of Klein's shoe met the blow of his arm, and the young man's body lightly flew through the air. Then the young man, twisting in midair, reached out and clenched his 5 outstretched fingers. With that, Leonardo's left arm was flattened without a sound. Leonardo's enlarged arm was crushed entirely at the wrist, elbow, and shoulder joints. The same damage was also done to his right arm. It was all linked to the opening and closing of the young man's hand, a guaranteed kill. Klein, this is not the most desirable method. Tristitia, Leonardo, not yet. Klein, oh my. Admiration, the young man who had landed and brushed off his knees widened his eyes. The reason for this was the presence of light bugs crawling across the lab floor, where the smell of blood lingered, attaching themselves to the young man's limbs. If the disturbances in Costule were Leonardo's doing, then of course he would be the one who was manipulating the light bugs. Whether that was through blood or some other means remained unclear. Leonardo, if I seal that hand, you won't be able to attack me again. Leonardo let out a deafening howl at the certainty of victory, as if his pain were being erased by some sanguine magic power. Leonardo rushed forward with a shout to crush the young man, whose movements were being sealed by the light bugs. Then, just before the massive body's tackle caused the young man's body to burst, Leonardo, Klein, I am truly sorry. My hand is inconsequential. Fascination, Leonardo's knees were crushed, and he fell headfirst to the ground, helplessly. The huge figure was left completely at his mercy, and the man, with all 4 limbs crushed, lost his fighting strength. It was an overpowering offensive and defensive battle that lasted less than a few seconds. Klein, Frederica, are you unharmed? Confirmation, Frederica, why, yes, I am fine. As long as you take off these shackles. Immediately after she said this, the iron shackles that restrained her wrists were abruptly torn off and removed. What Frederica struggled so hard to remove was removed so quickly by him that she could not tell if it had been touched. However, Frederica did not refer to it and got up, covering herself with a jacket. Frederica, so, what has happened to Garf and Costule? Klein, to say that as soon as you get up is unacceptable. Confirming your well-being should be the first priority. Imperative. Of course, it is ridiculous for a servant to cause concern for their master. Pitiable, Frederica, answer the question. Actually, why are you even here? This is not funny, Klein. On the iron bed, Frederica was fuming, forgetting to cover her mouth, and the young man Klein ostentatiously covered his ears. Frederica's anger only grew at that gesture. Ignoring Frederica's concerns, Klein told her, you need not worry. Klein, Garfield Summer is fighting that man's companion, but they are no match for him. Costule is being attended to by Emilia Summer. Perfection, Frederica, Garf aside, Emilia Summer? Why not the master? Klein, the master has his own plans. Forward thinking. Now then, Frederica, now then, what is it? Frederica cocked her head in astonishment, and Klein looked back at her and sighed. Then, furrowing his shapely eyebrows, Klein, as I expected, seeing you grow up is a disappointment. Regret, Frederica, which part of a person do you look at when you say that? You pervert. It was an outburst that made her lose all interest in thanking him for saving her life.
Chapter 7.
Garfield, that perverted scientist and the Lion Man bastard were working together. So, did that Lion Man bastard have the same rare blood as Sis? Realizing that, the perverted scientist got greedy. Having welcomed the unharmed Klein and the half-naked Frederica, Garfield lowered the big man to his feet and explained to them what had happened. The large space was heavily marked by intense signs of the fight between the 2 men. The blows were also etched into Garfield as scars, but not as many as the instantly felled Hayden. The white-eyed Hayden had all of his fangs in his mouth broken off and fainted, with blood bubbling out of his mouth. Frederica, He is knocked out? Right, Garfield, he's a tough bastard, ain't he, so he ain't dead. He kept cockily prattling on 'bout being a lion, so I wasn't boot lose to him as a tiger. Garfield was smiling nonchalantly in his triumphant glory, with no trace of sadness on his face. Although that was a relief, did he remember that his older sister had been kidnapped? Frederica, well, I was responsible for getting captured, and it is not reasonable to blame Garf for that. Garfield, oh? What are you talking 'bout, sis? I'm really relieved. I was really worried for you. Frederica, really? You have not forgotten about it until just now? Frederica glared at him with scornful eyes, and Garfield scratched his head and looked away. Then he puckered his lips in an apologetic manner. Garfield, but I thought if Klein were there, you'd be okay. Actually, it did work out. Frederica, it annoys me that your statement is not wrong. When told of Garfield's reassurances, Frederica was unable to say anything about their validity. The nonchalant man right beside her was an absolute equal to Roswell for Frederica. Unlike Roswell, he was just not someone in whom one could place their trust in without any qualms. Frederica, nevertheless, those lightbugs, this place, and these people, Klein, an ostracized researcher, who was expelled as a heretic. Amongst which was only one other man, for certain. Frederica, you have nothing to worry about. Evil, Frederica, an ostracized researcher, expelled as a heretic. Frederica's eyes were downcast at Klein's words, and she went deep in thought. She pulled Klein's jacket tighter around herself and looked at the already closing wounds on her wrists. She felt ashamed that the blood that flowed within her had brought about this situation. A long time ago, Klein had told Frederica about the dangers of rare blood, and now she felt pathetic that she had erred in front of him. He would be disappointed that she couldn't do what he told her to do. It was an unpleasant feeling. On top of that, she also caused trouble for her brother, the master she served, and the many other people who were kind to her. Klein. You think too much. Misapprehension, Frederica? Huh? Klein, how can the people you care about not care about you? That is just the way it is. Fact, Frederica, having expected to be reprimanded for her lack of ability, Klein's words took her by surprise. Her fangs trembled, and heat surged into her ears. Garfield, oh, yeah, sis. It really ain't good to be completely naked. I picked up some of your clothes just in case. Frederica, thank you for helping me, Garf. I will get dressed right away. In the corner of the room, Frederica was shown the clothes that Garfield had brought with him, and she accepted them, then returned to the hallway and happily got dressed. Turning their faces away from her, the men stood side by side. Garfield, I don't know what rare blood is, but there was a lot of trouble caused in the city just for the sake of sis, wasn't there? Klein, it has value for its own sake. Be wary, Garfield Summer. Warning, Garfield, what is it? Klein, the master is rarely moved by mere good intentions. If taking Ram is a milestone for the future, Frederica is certainly another one. Keep that in mind. Heed, at Klein's emotionless advice, Garfield lightly touched his fangs. Then, nodding his head with a yeah, Garfield, I never trusted that bastard Roswell from the get-go. He fits someone you should be suspicious of. Klein, it would seem. It is impossible for Frederica to do that. Devotion. Garfield was dismayed to learn that those words implied Frederica's trust in Roswell. Speaking of dismay, there was a presence right behind him. HK. You let your guard down, you two. The previously fainted Hayden jumped up. He laughed with a bloody, evil look on his face and swung his strong arms at Garfield and Klein, who had their backs turned to him. At that moment, Hayden's vicious blow was about to strike both of them in the back. Frederica, how dare you ruin my time with Garf? Hayden, leaping out of the darkened passageway, a powerful elbow struck Hayden directly in the face. Hayden flipped around with great force, spinning once before slamming to the floor, and this time being completely silenced. At Frederica's strike, Garfield and Klein, who had been about to intercept Hayden, looked at each other. Then Frederica, breathing furiously and still with her fist up, turned to them and said, Frederica, thank you for what you did today. But I am not the kind of person who is so pretty that I have to be protected all the time. I beg your pardon." Saying so forcefully, Frederica brushed away her long blonde hair with her hand. Garfield sighed after seeing her attitude and the words and actions that struck the villain. "Garfield, goo her. Ha 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 ha. Don't make me laugh, sis, ha 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 ha." Frederica, what is so funny? Klein, Frederica, childish bravado is the prerogative of the young. With you, it is painful. Disparity, Frederica, disproportionate, is that not an exaggeration? Garfield laughed loudly, and Klein lamented. Hurt by the pair's attitudes, Frederica relaxed her shoulders. Frederica, good grief, her skirt, which had been ripped just now by the elbow strike, was now ripped even more than it already was.
Chapter 8.
And though that would have been a good way to end it, ? Thank goodness all three of you are okay. So, did you figure out how to stop these little things? So shouted Emilia, sliding down the streets on a slab of ice and escaping the attacks of the huge light bug. Frederica was made speechless by her question and the city streets that had been ravaged by the fierce attacks. Next to her, Garfield and Klein also had an oh no look on their faces. Emilia Tan is doing a great job, but if we don't do something, they're going to run out of town. It'll be like a big kaiju battle if it does. Subaru. You need to look where you're going, I suppose. If you make such careless moves, you're going to end up flattened. In fact, Subaru, you are, unlike Emilia, who danced about brilliantly, it was Subaru who was running around on the ground holding Beatrice, desperately trying to get the situation under control. Although it was understandable that he rushed from the mansion and struggled to help Emilia, his abilities would be of no use here. The city had fallen into that much chaos. Emilia, Klein. Did this person tell you how they manipulated the light bugs? Klein, they are in a deep coma, and waking them up would be exceedingly difficult. Infeasible. Garfield, well, we'll just have to destroy them steadily. Emilia Summer, I'll lend you a hand. The two main offenders taken out of the cave were unconscious and incapable of being questioned about the light bug's operation. In response to this desperate answer, Garfield immediately opted for an aggressive solution and immediately joined the battle with Emilia, who was pleased. Klein looked over at this and exhaled, leaving his jacket in Frederica's care. He then said, Klein, I have my orders from Aunt Rose Summer. I, too, will assist Emilia Summer. Frederica, I am also coming. As Klein was about to proceed, Frederica lined up and said that to him. Hearing this, Klein took a moment to say something, then stopped. Klein, you have always been stubborn. Exasperated, Frederica, that is my line, they argued, and then Frederica and Klein also entered the battle for the defense of Costule. In the end, the battle raged on until just before the day's end, when the leading figure, Roswell, was finally deployed, and the situation was completely quelled. In response, ironically, Emilia's reputation in Costule skyrocketed. Behind the scenes, both Garfield and Klein secretly received severe reprimands from Petra for ruining Frederica's day trip outfit, but that was another story.